A very good morning, everybody. We are going to work with try-catch method today. In our previous chapter, we have seen what is an exception and what is exception handling. Exception is an exceptional situation, just like in case of error or invalid input given by the user or mismatching the communication with the server. So, a situation that comes in a system which may generate an error in the setup. Such cases are known as exception. Now we have different methods to catch the exception and throw it. So now we are going to look for how we handle the exception method. Now in this try catch block is this, which we are going to give and provide an example with this. Now the try block contains set of statements where an exception can occur. A try block is always followed by a catch block, which handles the exception that occurs in associated try block. A try block must be followed by catch blocks or finally block or both. Now, now let us have a look to the syntax of try block. Now this is the try block and inside whatever set of codes which we feel that yes we can have a chance of error in such codes. So we keep that set of codes inside the try block. Now while writing the program, if one is thinking that certain statements in a program can throw an exception or error, so we enclose them in try block to handle that exception. Now looking to the catch block, a catch block is where you handle the exceptions. Now this block must follow the try block instructions. So how? From where we get the exception. So that is the try block. And catch is always followed by try block. A single try block can have several catch blocks associated with it. Now you can catch different exceptions in different catch blocks. When an exception occurs in try block, the corresponding catch block that handles that particular exception executes. Now, for example, if an arithmetic exception occurs in try block, then the statements enclosed in the catch block for arithmetic exception executes. Now, let us have a look to the try catch block syntax. Now, here we can see that yes, inside the try block, we keep set of codes which are proximate to the errors. Now, in the catch blocks, we have an exception type, the object, and error handling code. Now let us have a look to the particular example. Now when we talk about the example, now if an exception occurs in a try block, then the control of execution is passed to the corresponding catch block. Now if we have a try block here and then we have a catch block. Now in the try block, if we have some error, it immediately moves to the catch block. Now a single block can have multiple catch blocks associated with it. Now, you should place the catch blocks in such a way that the generic exception handler catch block is at the last. Now we can see in the example. Now the generic exception handler can handle all the exceptions, but you should place it at the end. Now when you place it at the end, all the catch blocks, then it will display the generic message. Now you always want to give the user meaningful message for each type of exception rather than a generic message. Now in the example we have seen that we have a class example 1, public static void main string arguments. Now in this section we have, you can see that we have taken two variables num1 and num2. Now proceeding further to the try block. So in the try block we are just going to put anything that is proximate or can and have the chances of error. Now we suspect that this block of statement can throw exception. So we handle it by placing these statements inside try and handle the exception in the catch block. Now in this you can see that num1 is 0. Now num2 is 62 by num1. So in such cases you can see that when we are dividing the number by 0, this is a chance of giving an error or an exception. Now in the next line we are trying to display it. Now let us have a look to this. Now when one number is divided by 0, it is going to throw an exception. Now when it is going to throw an exception, so it will move to the catch block. Now when it is moving to the catch block, now see what are the things it is going to read it. Now this block will only execute if an arithmetic exception occurs in the try block. Now only if an arithmetic expression occurs, it is going to handle these cases. Now in this you should have, now in this we are displaying you should not divide a number by 0. So that means it shows that yes, we are trying to divide a number by 0. Now in the next catch, again we have, in the first part we have the object arithmetic exception E. In the second catch we have object exception E. So this is a generic exception handler, which means it can handle all the exceptions. Now this will execute if the exception is not handled by the previous catch block. Now there are different ways, just like in the previous part we have seen catch arithmetic exception E. So this, if there is an error or exception due to an arithmetic class or some error due to mathematical problem, so then it will go to the catch arithmetic exception. Otherwise, for common usage, we use the object exception E. Now then we have, so in this case, if it goes, it is going to display exception occurred. And in the last, out of this try catch method, we have displayed I am out of try catch block. So in this you can see that the output is you should not divide a number by 0, because after getting the error in this part, it was an error. So it directly moved to the catch part. It was checking, yes, it is an arithmetic error, so it is going to display this. Now in the previous part it was also a sort of multiple catch blocks. Now let us again have a brief look to multiple catch blocks. Now the example we have seen above is having multiple catch blocks. Now let us first check the rules of multiple catch blocks with the help of the example. Now in a single try block can have any number of catch blocks. This is the most important thing we should learn, that suppose we have a try block, then we can have any number of catch blocks. Now a generic catch block can handle all the exceptions, whether it is an array index out of bound exception or arithmetic exception or null pointer exception or any type of exception. It handles all of them. Now this is an generic catch block, that means catch exception E, that is a generic block and is used commonly for all sort of exceptions. Now other catch handlers, when we have a generic, that now I'm just going to read it. If you are wondering why we need other catch handlers when we have generic that can handle all. Now this is because in generic exception handler you can display a message, but you are not sure for which type of exception it may trigger, so that it will display the same message for all the exceptions, and user may not be able to understand which exception occurred. So that's the reason you should place it at the end of all specific exception catch block. Now in this we are discussing that we have a generic catch block which handles all the exceptions. But apart from this, we also have different catch blocks related to the particular, just like array out of index arithmetic expression so that user can know the exact error or exact type of exception. This is why we have separate division of different exception objects. Now, if no exception occurs in the try block, then the catch blocks are completely ignored. Now, corresponding catch blocks execute for that specific type of exception. Now, catch arithmetic exception E is a block that can handle arithmetic exception. Now then we have null pointer exception that can handle null pointer exception. So we have different type. Now what we can do, suppose we have proceeding further, we can also throw an exception. Now in this case when we are talking about throwing and catch block, now just have a look to the example, second example. In this we have class example 2. Then we have public static void main. In this we have an array. Then in this we have another array in which we are going to store 30 divided by 0. So in this part it is going to show an error and it will move to the next part. It will move to the arithmetic exception part. In this we have warning arithmetic exception. In the next part we have array out of bound exception. In the third part we have the generic exception. Now in this you can see that we have an int array which is the first part new in this. Now let us have a look to this. Out of try catch block and warning exception 3, because in the first part you can see that in this we have two exception, arithmetic exception to hold the arithmetic problem or arithmetic error. Now we have array index out of bound exception, that is to handle the out of bound error in an array if it occurs. Now in the above example there are multiple catch blocks. Now these catch blocks executes sequentially when an exception occurs in try block. Now which means that when you put the last catch block exception catch exception E at the first place just after try block, then in case of any exception this block will execute and it can handle all exception. So this catch block should be placed at the last to avoid such situations. Now let us have a look to the finally block. This block executes whether an exception occurs or not. You should place the statements in finally block that must execute whether exception occurs or not. Now this block executes whether an exception occurs or not. Now we are going to have a situation in which we are going to have a finally block. Now in the finally block whether exception happens or whether not exception happens, so we need to keep a set of common part which should be executed even after exception happens or it is not even if it is not happening. In our further chapters we are going to have a brief look to about finally. In our next chapters we are going to check multiple catch blocks we have already seen here. Then we are going to have nested try catch method. Then we are going to have a look to the finally block, throw keyword and throw clause.